Good evening, everyone. My name is Vikas Bhadra, Associate Editor of ACE Update magazine, and I welcome you all to the ACE Update interactive session on Green by Design, balancing sustainability and aesthetics. Post the COVID period, architects, designers, and clients, all of them have given more thought to the wellness of the individuals rather than designing concrete abodes loaded with opulence. There has been an increased amount of sensitivity towards aligning public and private spaces with the requisite dose of what we refer to as green design or sustainable architecture. This has resulted in a creative spurge in the green arena. However, the idea is also to ensure that aesthetics are not compromised in the process. Keeping this in mind, today, ACE Update has organized an online interaction on Green by Design, aligning sustainability with aesthetics.
The distinguished speakers for today's interaction on Green by Design, balancing sustainability and aesthetics are Ms. Shweta Kaur, who is Principal Architect of Studio Meraki, Mr. Udit Metala, who is the founder of Building Energy India, and Mr. Sachin Rastogi, who is Design Principal and Director of Z Labs.
Ms. Shweta Kaur, ancient Indian architecture was sustainable and also beautiful. So is it that as we increasingly embrace contemporary architecture, is it like we have moved away from our roots, and this is kind of causing a problem of sorts?
Well, I think as we say that change is inevitable. So societies change, civilizations change, building materials, know-how, technologies, climate, everything changes. So I think we do adopt a few of the traditional technologies these days, like how Mr. Rastogi has talked about courtyards and double skin facades, taking emphasis from the Havelis and the forts. So obviously we always take clues from our traditional buildings when we are sensitive about design. But I think primarily our society has become very opulent, and the clients these days are less, I hate to say this, but yes, the clients are less sensitive and more indulgent. So there is, for example, when we do residences, I think if you tell clients that, you can have water bodies, you can have plants, you can have greenery, you can have this and that, and natural ventilation, their primary focus is that I want this expensive chandelier, I want this expensive sofa, I want this expensive marble. So they don't really care about what is the embodied energy of that particular marble slab that's coming, because it's just shifted. It's all about being over the top and being extremely extravagant, and that is a primary shift in the society that I see. So very few architects are able to convince their clients about the value that you will be able to add into the quality of your life if you follow certain passive design principles, or you follow certain principles of design which save you energy, because the upfront cost, again, clients feel that there's a lot of expensive upfront cost maybe in a lot of things. And the ROI, we explain to them the ROI, but again, it is the competition which is in their mind, which they have with their neighbors, with the society, and it's just engaging in opulence. That's it. That is my, it's a very crude way of saying it, but that's what I feel. That's the primary thing. Of course, we want to do it, but it's tough. I feel it's tough.
Yeah. So, and if you look at it, when you didn't quote the term probably snobbish or the status symbol.
I thought that would be too rude to say on a public platform, probably. So, yeah, they are excessively, yeah.
But that category, when you relate, say, eco-friendly designs, or when you relate energy-efficient designs, what is the barrier for people to accept this as one of the luxurious, say it also have a luxurious option, right?
Yes,
and where we are failing there?
I think it also is, one is cost and one is there's a gap between the architects and the designers, which needs to be filled up. I think designers and the clients, there needs to be a very effective communication channel, which at times is not there. And to be able to convince them of a lot of ways of building in technologies, as at times becomes very hard because of them people being quite stingy and snobbish. And also people think that probably this is not as important. I think there's a mindset that people really don't care about the environment. Honestly, people don't. I mean, they don't. I mean, they can do whatever, but very few people actually care about the environment.
I just want to say something here.
Want to say something? Yes,
So, in fact, there's actually something where we understand that if the society isn't aware and that awareness is not there, then it becomes our responsibility as the consultant to educate the client also, and from their level to what level is required for them to understand what we're talking about. And it's a very difficult thing because they need to see the value in what you're talking about and value it at the same level you do. So, that is a process, and different clients are different. Different clients speak a different language. But I think overall, especially in the new generation that is coming up of clients, I think there has been a certain level of shift in the education system also towards environmental awareness. And it's becoming a new tag even in other countries. And so people want it even for that tag or brand value as sustainability. It's becoming a thing slowly now.
Completely agree with you that education or educating about this is very, very essential. And probably if you look at it, every stage of architecture, if you see, this was there, like educating the crowd about why it's so. But Mr. Sachin, how do you respond to it? Is it, when you look at it, energy efficient designs or eco-friendly designs, if you prefer, it will be more costlier than conventional construction?
Not at all, actually. My point of view is very different. In fact, that's where I disagree that that's where architect's role is very, very important. You see, since our traditional buildings, they were completely response to, having a habitat, a response to it's hotter outside, can't survive, need a shelter, response to it's raining outside, need a shelter. So, from those basic response, we have moved on, we have globalized, clients are working very, very hard and they have aspirations. So it is very difficult to tell them to, go back and live, sleep on the terraces, go onto the balconies for ventilation whenever you feel the discomfort. It's very, very difficult as an architect to convince them to be able to do that. And that's where the designer has to change his own outlook and understand where and how one can create that balance. For example, we do have courtyards traditionally, and it is very difficult to now sell a courtyard to a client because the land prices are, exorbitant, and they want to cover up each and every single inch of that particular land piece. So courtyards, transition spaces are going off the window very, very quickly, as Shweta is saying that they're not environmental conscious at all. And that's right to a certain extent, because they're not the architects, they're not the designers, they're not the experts on the climate either. So we cannot really, expect that kind of a behavior from them. So one has to really educate them, A, B, understand their need, and there has to be an amalgamation of, what the ideas were. So use the principle, like the courtyard we incorporate the swimming pool over there, so that it becomes of a social value and a recreational value and aesthetical point of view for the client, for them to not give it up. Now the swimming pool serves many purposes for me, which are very different from what client really wants. So for me, it creates a comfortable microclimate as a water body. It creates, it absorbs all the heat. It creates, a condition where one would like to sit right next to the water. And when I enter the house, the sound of water and, the lighting impact creates beautiful aesthetic. For client, it's kind of a, over the top show off. He can tell to the others that I have a pool in the house. It's a recreational activity for him. So different aspiration from a designer point of view and from a user point of view. But a balance can be created. So that's where I think, a designer's approach is very, very important. And coming back to the question of monetary, differences between a green building and a non-green approach, I think if the designer takes right passive design approaches and do a lot of analysis at the initial design stage, a lot of new age technology materials like high insulation, double glazed windows, airtight envelopes, you can eliminate the need. I don't think that is the need of the hour. I think as a designer, if your passive design approach is strong enough, you can eliminate, spending more bucks on creating, the same results. So that's where I think I think it's designers' responsibility to be able to resolve all these issues.
Hopefully, and even Mr. Gaurav Pandey was agreeing with Shweta's point of view. He was telling me, "Log samajhte nahi hai bol rahe sida." Right? Probably
people are very hurt. And no, but I mean, I agree with Sachin that like I also would say I have got like 1 in 20 clients who listen to me, and I made a passive design building, a hotel in Katra, which if I had gone the conventional way, it would have been an energy guzzler and probably he would have more rooms in it. Currently, maybe he has a lesser rooms, but the building is fully daylit. You don't need any artificial lighting anytime during the day. So he's able to save at least 30%. But that's what I'm saying, that there is a scope, because I could explain it to him. But I've primarily seen the North Delhi people a little more stubborn. But again, I'm not saying that is, of course, I mean, it's a marriage between, all the parties that needs to take.
Two sides, absolutely. Mr. Udit, when you were sharing that project, it was very impressive. And frankly, to say that when everybody want to build a landmark, they want to make their project as a landmark. And when you talk about availability of local resources can be well utilized for a project. Say, for example, you also mentioned about using laterite for facades. But if you see, one of the concern comes about the durability aspect, or the concern about the security, safety, and durability of the products what we can use if it is available locally. How do you address that? Have you ever faced such challenges from, say, project promoters or developers?
So usually in terms of durability and safety point of view, like if you're saying the wall is not strong enough if you go with a sustainable material, what I would say is, in fact, it's the other way around. When we look at sustainable materials or local materials, usually you have local techniques say that you have a wider wall. And the reason you have a wider wall is because you have a higher thermal mass when you make wider, thicker walls. Are more durable, those are more safe to live in, and they're cooler in internal spaces in those buildings. This is how it is usually. However, yes, there is a crunch for space that people always have, and that's why we've moved to the more modern materials, which try to reduce the thickness of your brick, include your air gaps inside your bricks, and so that's where you then have a safety issue, or that's where your bricks are actually hollow in the entire wall, and so you may not have as strong a wall from someone breaking in as compared to something which is traditionally solid, stone constructions, which are also safe. So they have a lot of qualities which we have actually undermined in the urban kind of growth that has happened in cities. So it is very different for cities as compared to rural areas. I think there's a very different set of materials also which you have access to. In cities, you're more efficiency driven, space included, whereas in the rural you have that floor space, and so you can do a lot more. And I think there's a difference there as well.
Absolutely. And also Mr. Vishal Arora was sharing that somehow our laws and regulations or standards do not support passive architecture. Probably but most of the projects are being handled by, say, private sector, and it is being promoted and invested by private parties.
I actually want to say something which, when I was looking at Mr. Rastogi's presentation, the double facade or even on the rooftop shading that we do, the ECDC does not take care of, doesn't include shading or rooftop shading in its calculations. And this was something that was also surprising to me. The ECBC is the Energy Conservation Building Code. This is a regulation, Energy Conservation Building Code being one of the, regulations that have now come into play for buildings, and it does give specific criteria that one needs to follow in order to bring down your energy consumption in a building through its building envelope. However, in their envelope calculations, they don't take into account rooftop shading. And I think across India, we have a lot of examples where shading or the double skin on the walls as well as on rooftop bring down your temperatures drastically. So as per, that's one of the regulations which I just thought, since somebody also asked a question about regulation, this was something that came to mind as to, why don't we consider shading in our energy conservation building codes? And wouldn't that make it more easy for people to adhere to the code and get involved with rating their buildings?
I just like to add, my experience with sustainable materials is very different, because when we try to use exposed brickwork, or we try to use adobe walls, or any other thing which is a natural material, there are very, very high maintenance issues. And when you talk about sustainability, it is not just about applicability. It is also about adjusting and living with those, kind of defects throughout your lifetime. So it's a lifestyle issue which one has to, address to the client and make them understand that yes, there are some loopholes and there are some problems which are which can be overcome with new age technology. Like for example, the brick will absorb moisture whenever it rains, and it will show up on your wall from the inner side. The hostels which we have built, whenever we were doing the curing, they absorbed all the water, and eventually all the salt show up in form of efflorescences. So the client do face difficulties with respect to natural materials. And as a designer, we need the market support, where they come up with these products which can solve and help the designers in resolving these issues and make them more applicable product to the wider audience. And also, we need to inform the client that these are lifestyle thinking which one has to live with and adapt to. So I think these are the two experiences from my own projects which I would like to share.
I think Shweta and Mr. Sachin both at the beginning, they kind of made it very clear that at times it is very difficult to convince the client, and there's always a tug of war between ostentation and sustainability. So keeping that in mind, I had this query, like, do we need an intervention by the way of a government policy perhaps to encourage sustainability? Because we already have ratings in place, and even after these ratings, if we are unable to achieve what we have in mind, is intervention by the way of a government policy the way forward, or will that be too authoritarian? I would like Mr. Udit to address this.
So I think there is a policy/code in some aspects, at least in terms of some resources. For example, the Energy One, the ECBC that I was talking about earlier, the ECBC was created in 2007. It was not made fully mandatory at all. It was completely optional, but it existed. In 2017, they revised that code. It was still not completely mandatory, but they made it climate specific. They realized why they failed the first time. It wasn't specific to all the types of climate in a single country. And so they revised it. Now, most government buildings do have to do it mandatorily. And then we also have some commercial buildings or residential buildings above a certain size. So if the built up is more than 10,000, those projects do need to actually adhere and get clearances for the Energy Conservation Building Code. So what the government is saying at this point, I could be wrong, is that we have to do it step by step. We have to phase it in, because a sudden change and just telling everyone to change the way they're doing things will not work. However, let's target the larger projects where there's scope, where there's money to put in, the builder can do it, and then start from the top downwards. And the last ones will be the residential, where they make it mandatory. So this is the way that I'm aware of, as far as I'm aware, that they're trying to slowly percolate and get into the markets rather than directly implement a complete shift.
I just remember something from my experience of working in Singapore as to how the government intervenes and things change. Like for example, in the envelope facade design in Singapore, there is something called as a value called as ETTV, which means the envelope thermal transfer value. Basically, roughly like like how a layman's language is say how much heat gain through a building. So the government is constantly pushing down that figure. So earlier it was okay. It needs to be minimum 50 watts per meter square for any building to be eligible for construction. Then the platinum ratings come down to 25 watts per meter square. So what I have seen there, that there is a competition amongst the builders to get those brownie points, and there's a competition amongst the architects and various groups that my building has lesser ETTV than that building, so I have a better building. So this kind of this ETTV value has driven the facade design so badly and drastically there that it's just a result of government intervention, and they gave more incentives. So yeah, that's how that's one example that crossed my mind.
So I think the intervention does have some impact after all. So
well, people there are going crazy. So
Mr. Rastogi, to address this is like, apart from green buildings and sustainability, we have heard a lot about smart buildings, and we have also heard the fact that existing buildings can be made smart by using retrofits. So like there are existing buildings in the urban landscape, and they might not be sustainable. They might look good. So what are possibly some ways and methods to make them sustainable? Or what is the piece of advice that you would like to share?
One thing is that what you do and presume post construction, which is the design process analysis, where you have the U values to be met, and the other technical aspects which one look into. But then you have the post occupancy analysis, and in UK your post occupancy analysis is supposed to be submitted to the council, and this is result driven. So once you start doing this result driven observations, it provides direct benefit to the client, and one understand that why do I need an envelope which has a lower U value, which has higher resistance, which has a shading device. As a user, I don't know what is the benefit of that. So when this post-occupancy analysis is done, and this is where these smart buildings can become very, very important tool for existing larger envelope and urban infrastructure, wherein if you can develop a device where you can understand the performance of your current house. And for example, I live in a building which is approximately 40 years old. Now, it is very difficult to convince my own parents that we need to replace the windows and make them double glazed. You need a more tighter envelope. So if I have these smarter buildings, which tells me, that your performance of this facade is letting you lose the heat, or, you have to use the air conditioning extensively, then I'll look into that factor of the building and start making those smaller interventions and eventually make it a more sustainable product, which is based on my understanding of what my smart tool is telling me. So this is where I think the retrofitting becomes very, very interesting and a larger interface.
There's one thing, like when it comes to achieving sustainability, we also have to take into consideration the entire life cycle of construction. Definitely architecture and design is a part of it. Then there is this entire life cycle of construction that comes into play. So what are some of the changes in the entire life cycle of construction that I think needs to be looked at to ensure that we arrive at the fine balance of sustainability and aesthetics? Shweta, what would you like to add on this?
Oh, well, yeah, of course. I think as is the concept, there's a concept called embodied energy, in which you take the life cycle, which is called the cradle to grave approach. So what we think is that once you've designed a building on the table, we can do all the necessary simulations and CFD analysis and everything. But then what happens on the ground is the real question. So one question is that whether we are able to meet whatever we designed on paper in the actual construction of the building, and also how the site is being taken care of, how the materials are coming, is there water being wasted at site? So what are the practices being done at site? How is the waste being disposed of at site? How is it being recycled? Are there any hazardous chemicals that are overflowing? So it's not just about design. It is also about the entire life cycle of the building, right from inception to the concept stage to the building execution stage, and also the post-occupancy and the materials disposal stage. So, for example, I am constructing a building, and at site, I'm using a lot of electricity for any particular machine or any particular purpose. Any kind of machinery, it just beats the whole purpose. So, looking only at the design part is a very like just one side of the picture, because what happens at site is the actual scenario, which is actually going to affect the cost savings and the energy savings of the project. So I see a lot of societies in which you have this, there'll be a board of, okay, we are aiming for IGBC LEED, this rating, that rating. But if you go to the site and you see how things are working on site in terms of material is being wasted, water is being wasted, how the resources are being utilized, stacked, everything, it doesn't follow. So I think there needs to be the sustainable approach needs to come in all walks of all spheres of construction activity, even after the building is built and the users are using it, and not just one particular stage. That's my take on it.
Coming back to our original title about how we're looking at design and sustainability, but also looking at it from an aspect of aesthetics. And aesthetics has its own value, right? So all of these technical discussions, we're talking about ways to bring down our carbon footprints, ways to take care of the resources we use, the materials, all of that, ways to incorporate everything in such a way, in a method that is not a known method or might take use of traditional methods, but creating a method where we can find ways to ensure that this is the way we can do it for the next, how many ever years, rather than something that is short term. And so that's where the sustainable part of it comes in. And then when we create that method, let's find a way that is beautiful, that also accepts that, yes, aesthetics is not something that is to be taken lightly, that people do want to live in a space that brings them wellness. It brings them peace, serenity. And these are things that we also want to have in our designs. And so finding that balance between the two of bringing sustainability into our design, but also bringing the aesthetic aspect for people to live together in harmony with the environment, nature, and the planet. I think that's kind of the vision that we're all looking to get to.
Thank you. Thank you, Udit. And thank you, panelists, for exchanging your valuable thoughts on today's topic, Green by Design, Balancing Sustainability with Aesthetics. We hope you have enjoyed it. Before wrapping up today's session, we would also like to thank our distinguished panelists, Shweta Kaur, Sachin Rastogi, and Mr. Udit Lathala. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been 17 months since we began our online interactions, and the immense love and attention we have received along the way has kept us going. Today, as we wrap up this year's last online interaction, we would like to thank you all and wish you a happy and a prosperous new year. We promise to keep you engaged in 2022 as well. And for your viewers who have joined us today, we would like to have your feedback, and we encourage you to stay connected with us via our social media handles. ACE Update is available on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Additionally, you can also download our app from Google Play and App Store. With that, we announce the conclusion of this webinar. Thank you and goodbye.